There we go. All right. Mayor Parker?
Here.
Mr. Jacobs?
Here.
Mr. Strackoff?
Here.
Ms. Christie? Here. Mr. Landuse?
Here.
Mr. Leonard?
Here.
Mr. Deep?
Here.
Mr. Zupnik?
Here.
Ms. Patras?
Here.
And Ms. Gutschall.
Here.
Adequate notice of this meeting of the Bedminster Township Land Use Board was filed with the Township Clerk and sent to the Burnsville News and the Courier News and to all subscribers and posted in the Township Municipal Building, 1 Miller Lane, Bedminster, New Jersey, on January 12, 2018.
Stand for the flag, please.
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I think we have some correspondence here from the Cancer Support Community Center. They are looking for an extension of their current approval. They're looking for a year on that. I don't know who was on the board at the time.
Well, actually, everybody's eligible because it's just an extension.
Except the mayor and Larry.
No, yeah, because of the D variance.
It is.
Sorry.
Yeah.
But this is pretty straightforward. I recommend it to you. The Wellness Community Central New Jersey is a great organization. They had a prior approval. They're trying to get their charitable donations, etc., to be able to proceed, and they asked for a 1-year extension by letter of Mr. Mullen. Unless anybody has any questions, it's pretty straightforward. A motion to approve a 1-year extension for the Wellness Community Central New Jersey, known as the Cancer Support Community of Central New Jersey. And is there such a motion?
So moved.
Seconded.
Mr. Strackoff?
Aye.
Ms. Christie? Aye. Mr. Azilius?
Aye.
Mr. Leonard?
Aye.
Mr. D?
Aye.
Mr. Zupnik?
Aye.
Ms. Patras? Aye. And Ms. Gutschall.
Aye.
Thank you.
Motion carried. Is there anyone here that would like to talk about anything that's not on the agenda? Okay, seeing nothing, we will move on. So I think we're right to our Mayor, Bob Holtaway. And this is about the re-examination of our master plan. This is the committee that was put together a few months ago. And so I'll leave it up to you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. It's good enough?
Trina, just make sure his microphone is
It's on.
It's on. It's on.
live and in concert.
Different set of away with this then. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Bob Holtaway. We were appointed, the four of us were appointed to a subcommittee called the Master Plan Review Committee last year. Consisted of myself as chairman, Tim Walter, Colin Hickey, and Jason Andrus. And the approach to, well, first off, my background in zoning, so just so you understand that this is not my first game. I was first appointed to a planning board in 1977 in North Plainfield. Second year I was there, I was made vice chair. We went through the revisions to the ordinances required by the state land use law, which was rewritten in '78. I was then appointed to the Board of Adjustment. I spent 15 years on the Board of Adjustment in North Plainfield, 10 of them as chairman. When I then spent 2 years as a zoning officer in North Plainfield, I moved here. I was appointed to the planning board in 97 or 98. I spent 8 years there, 7 of them as chairman. Then was elected to the township committee, and I sat on this board for the 8 years that I was mayor. So I am familiar with the subject matter. what we did was we decided to take a holistic view of what's happening in the world and what's happening around us. And we realized that we're not doing the master plan reexamination. We were charged to focus on items, to talk to folks, to get out there, get down in the bushes and get down in the weeds with people, which we did. There's a list of committees we met here with, and we have their input. Some of them had stuff to say, some of them didn't. Those that had comments are included in the report. And we are aware that we are a committee offering opinions, that your board is solely responsible for the master plan. We will be happy to work forward with you on that, to help explain items and why we think what we thought and why we documented what we did. But we did discover, and if you go to page 4, this is the first work product that we did. And it's the converging trends and influences. And we took a look out there at all the things that impact land use here in Bedminster and actually in the whole state of New Jersey. And what we discovered was that there have been very, very substantial changes, and there are very substantial changes yet to come. The workplace is changing radically. How we work, where we work, the space we work in is changing. Housing, there's been tremendous change in the demographics, the nature of how we live and what we want to live in, and where we want to live relative to our work is changing. Not so much for us old guys, but for the young people that are making up the majority, the up-and-coming population. What are the things that are affecting transportation? What are the impacts we're going to have? Farmland and open space, this is something that we've started and we're going along, and we have some suggestions there to help preserve and expand and keep that viable. We live in a regulatory environment, and there's things that are happening out there. Some of our Bedminster's issues have been resolved since we started this, luckily. And then the business ecosystem, how are they running? What are they doing? What are businesses looking for? How is it happening? How is it changing? So this was the core of the start of our thinking. We then looked around town and we said, well, what do we think are the most important items and the items of immediate concern, special concern? Preserving Western Bedminster. You know, when you take a look at development around us, some of these towns have been chopped up and there's no real contiguous farmland. There's no contiguous areas for wildlife. And we probably, of the towns in Somerset County especially, we're about the last of the No-Mohegans in having large swaths of open land. And we feel that this really has got to be looked at hard. And if you look at our recommendations, probably the least subtle one is creating a new zone, an agricultural zone, with 25 to 40 acre lot sizes. If you go through the western areas of Bedminster, there are substantial areas where the lots are already that size. A lot of them are estate type lots, a lot of them are farm lots. And to take Western Bedminster into 10 acre plots will not provide the protection to the water, will not provide the protection for wildlife, and it will not be able to continue farming. And that's something that's part of our economy. And but we also recognize that there are areas out in the western parts of town, such as Union Grove, Lamington, Burt Mills, that are villages. They are developed, fully developed, and they should be left in the R10. So we envision an agriculture area that kind of wraps around these areas of existing development. Another important thing that we're concerned about is houses of worship. As you know, we were involved in our LUPA suit through the decision by the Board of Adjustment a number of years ago. And our conclusion, our discussion felt that, number one, religion is not a growth business in today's world. And but the religion that is no longer neighborhood oriented. Back in the day, there was a church in a village, and if you take a look at all of our villages, whether it's Lamington or Pottersville, and our original villages of Peapack and Gladstone, they were neighborhood churches. That's no longer the case. And our feeling is that houses of worship should not necessarily be allowed in residential zones anymore. They are no longer an accessory residential use, and that they should be put into the non-residential commercial corridor. The existing, obviously, the churches that are now in those villages would be pre-existing non-conforming uses and could continue. Another big issue is revolving rentals. You know, this is something that, as part of our culture, has become a very popular way to travel. An awful lot of people do it. Sometimes it's done very subtly. You don't even know what's happening, and other times not so much. And we don't have a solution for that. Technically, it's in violation of zoning ordinance. You're running basically a boarding house, and it's basically a non-conforming use. But our feeling is that we cannot just ignore items that are happening in our society. You just can't close your eye to it. You have to either accommodate it, address it, restrict it, but you can't ignore it, and you can't let it run wild. I mean, there's a middle ground that has to be found, and we don't have any answer for that for you, I'm afraid. The other thing we looked at were properties of special concern. AT&T is the largest property in our existing OR zone. While there's been significant investment in AT&T, we do know that AT&T sold the property to MetLife some number of years ago. There is a lease by AT&T on that property that expires in 2023. And that type of land use, that kind of very large single user campus, is not easily supported in today's marketplace. That is not what companies are looking for anymore. So it has a pending obsolescence. I realize that Mallinckrodt moved into town and they took over a single user space. It didn't start that way, but they have ended up turning it into a single user campus. I think statistically we were very lucky that that happened, but I don't think that you're going to be able to expect something like that on the AT&T campus. It's a very, very substantial position. It's 26% of our commercial ratables, and obviously every dollar that is not covered by every commercial ratable goes into the residential ratables as a tax to carry that piece of the tax burden. So preserving the value of that property is probably the highest, and that's no surprise to you. I'm sure you've heard that and you all realize that. I know as mayor, when I first became mayor, the second thing that Finn and I were faced with, number one, of course, was the fact that the previous administration had agreed to purchase EDC for an amount of money that was unsustainable. The next important thing we had was the tax appeal at AT&T. They had at that time been eating the empty building up in Basking Ridge, and they wanted they were appealing the taxes on Bedminster, and they wanted it assessed at 99 million, and we had it at about 300 and some million. We managed to settle it. We did okay with it, but I know the current administration has had to suffer from tax appeals from that piece of property, and it's an ongoing battle. And the fact that it is obsolete is something that has to be paid attention to. You may luck out, right? AT&T may renew its lease, but as we all know, hope is not a plan, and failure to plan will lead you to failure. So I think it's very important that this really be focused on. The Advanced Realty property Advanced Realty property on 206 is another property we have concerns about. There have been proposals for development on the property. They're still considering some proposals. It was a late 90s, as a matter of fact, it was adjudicated by the planning board while I was chairman. It's a multi-tenant facility. One of the problems that they are having is that the rents are, due to the amount of vacancies in Somerset County, that is driving all the rents down. And they're trying to maintain that property the way it has been maintained for these years is not as possible as it was years ago. So what's going to happen is that quality goes down and the maintenance goes down and the lack of modernization goes down, the value goes down, the rateable goes down, and again, you're shifting the tax burden from the non-residential to the residential. Lamington Road on the north side of 206, this was an application, it was a Board of Adjustment application that you processed. What we're seeing is that type of development is what's happening, and if you look at the data from the financial analysis of the Highlands that was completed by the Highlands Council some time ago, or actually a year ago, you're going to find that residential, single-family residential in the Highlands region, which you are in, peaked in 1998. We all thought it was about 2004, 2006, but actually peaked in 1998 and has been dropping since. There's been a little pickup since the 2008 debacle. However, what has not suffered and is growing rapidly in the Highlands area is, in the North Jersey area, is multifamily housing, mixed-use type uses. So around us, there's big change in how development is happening, and we think that this Lamington property is going to be targeted for something. It's going to happen. Is VN the right thing for that property? We're not necessarily convinced. The next property of concern is the Purnell School. This is a piece of property that was a large residential estate. It was donated to a school, the Purnell School, that's been there for a lot of years. However, due to the changes in the demographics and what's happening, they are having trouble sustaining school enrollment, and their income has been reduced. They are unable to have the money available for the type of maintenance that we would like to see. They did have a spurt a number of years ago, 10, 15 years ago, they did some new construction. However, the ability of that school to survive, in our opinion, is in question, and that the property should be addressed. Again, hope is not a plan, and something we feel should be done in order to prepare for that eventuality. And it's a large site, it's about 80 acres. The advantage and the disadvantage is it is in the Highlands Preservation Area, which means that the Highlands, the law, actual statutory requirements on what development can be done, what increases can be done, which benefits us, and the amount of development that could possibly be done on that property, but it limits to some extent its use. Willow School, again, the whole private school thing is changing, and that school was built 10, 15 years ago when it was started. When it came here before the board, it was non-conforming at the time, and again, it's in the Highlands Preservation Area. This site is different than the Purnell site because it was a purpose-built school. It was built as a school, and the development is very high quality, very environmental friendly. I'm sure all of you, or many of you, have over the years taken the tours that they have offered and seen what a wonderful place it is. It may not survive as a school, in our opinion. There's a chance that, again, they're going to suffer from reduced enrollment, and you have to be prepared for that. We are offering options for the properties of special concern, and some of our thinking is explained. Essentially, we're recommending creating, for non-residential areas, adaptive reuse zones. That these zones would be identified as targeted for adaptive reuse, and number one, they would be form-based zoning, that we would take a look at the nature of the property and how it lays and set up bulk requirements, and then let the uses fall as they may. I was a young sprout in North Plainfield, and I remember the banner of the board one night was that they thought there were too many dry cleaners in town, and they wanted to try to restrict dry cleaners. And my comment was, they would go out of business by themselves if they weren't. Why are you worrying about what it is? And I think that in this day and age, with the desire for mixed use, with a supermarket being next to an apartment building, next to a laboratory, and we can look at the old Aventus site in Bridgewater. They're maintaining a lot of laboratories, they're maintaining that. The old office buildings are being torn down, there's going to be a supermarket, there's going to be residential housing, there's going to be retail areas, and it's the kind of a thing that as a entity is apparently under demand. They're selling, they're renting, they're leasing, and as a single use property by a single tenant, there's no way they couldn't do anything with that property. So I think that is really the trend, and I think that using form-based zoning, where the interest, the environment, the visual, the traffic, and everything are controlled and accessed, but let the uses fall as they may. Let the marketplace decide so that they are successful. Which leads to the next comment, which is we believe that these properties should be left as large single tracts. That way you're dealing with a developer who is responsible for the entire site. All of the construction is controlled through one source, coordinated. If you allow subdivision of those large pieces of property, you will then have diverse interests with diverse architecture, with it'd be like turning it into, especially as something like the AT&T property with so many existing buildings on it. What gets torn down, what doesn't get torn down, how do you assess it? But if you're treating that as a single tract and bringing in a large developer who will have the resources to spend the money on the architecture, the demolition, and all of that, to subdivide it, then put you into less, I don't want to say less qualified developers, but developers with less resources to be able to do the research, to do the market studies, and to handle the construction and maintenance of the property. The other thing what we'd like to recommend is the creation of an intermunicipal transfer of development right program. As we know, we've been rather successful with farmland preservation. However, what's happened is our farmland preservation, our open space trust fund has been allowed to be used for other maintenance and building and everything else. So there's not going to be as much money available for the purchase of property and for property rights. And if we can create a TDR here within the municipality, we could allow, and again, no numbers, but increased coverage, increased FAR could be available in certain zones, in these adaptive reuse zones, if they purchase farmland preservation rights within Bedminster in the rural environments. This would help subsidize the purchase of that property, and increase the viability of the farm industry, where we don't want those properties cut up, we want them preserved, because any business requires a lot of infrastructure and a lot of support. Our major agricultural industry is equine. You need large animal vets, you need farriers, you need farmers to do the hay, you need barn builders, you need maintenance people, you need people to take care of the horses, fence builders. I mean, there's all this infrastructure that's required to support this agricultural industry. But if you don't have enough of it, you can't support the service industries require. So, and I don't think we're there as well as we should be. I think that if we expand the farmland, we will help those industries survive and support it, and it's, you know, one hand will be washing the other. As to the residential areas, the two schools that are in residential areas that are currently in the R10 zone, we recommend another adaptive reuse zone in AR2, specifically for the Highland Preservation Area, that again would be form-based zoning, taking into consideration the extraordinary requirement for preservation of resources in that area. So, and again, it's the form-based zoning that will provide opportunity for people to come in and actually meet the demand as they see it, and not us trying to determine the best and highest use. There's other land management issues that have come to face, and one of them is that, as you know, I sit on the Highlands Council, at least for another little while until Governor Murphy fires me. But we're of the opinion that we should look at adopting the Highlands Master Plan. And there's a little section in here about the advantages of doing that. We are in the Highlands. We are planning area Highlands. There's a lot of development grants. They have economic development grants for towns that do come in that enable us to, as you're preserving land, they want to help make your centers viable, and so you can support the open environment. So we strongly recommend that be investigated by the planning board, and recommendations made relative to that. Office parking, and again, now we're talking into other things that are not necessarily master plan, but I think that the planning board as a whole should approach it. When you read this document, you're going to read the discussion about how the office environment has changed over the years. And whereas when I was young, 250 square feet was the magic number. 4 per thousand, everybody, 4 per thousand, 4 per thousand. And really that was what industry was. That was what the market was. It was roughly 250 foot gross per person. Nowadays we're dealing with 125 to 150. So what that's doing is it's creating a increase in the parking requirement in most of these facilities. And so if there is an adaptive reuse of AT&T, based on how that pans out, the parking requirements may be much higher under that type of use. Although Colin tells us that they are driving to those kind of numbers already on the AT&T property. Medical parking, another one, another change in our society and how we operate. Medical for years was a single office provider, usually in a house. Our ordinance allows them to be in their house. You would go to their house, you would sit there and have your medical thing, and the doctor, maybe you'd have an assistant, and then you'd go home. Now, these things are big business. Our consumption of medical services is much, much higher than it's ever been. The way these clinics now operate, they're very high turnover, very short duration, a lot of intensity in a small amount of space. And so what's happening is the 5 per thousand that we use for medical is now becoming inadequate to really support the medical facilities. And I can only point you to the orthopedics just north of Quick Check, where they park on the highway, they park on the grass, they park all over. Religious parking. Again, religion's changing, and the religions in the United States now aren't what they were when our ordinances were written in 1946. There's been a lot of change and everything else. And in some cases, there's just one individual per vehicle. Up in Berners Township, there was testimony during the Board of Adjustment hearing that that was the use. So the planning board required extra parking spaces to accommodate that. Well, that's how they lost their case, was that requirement of extra spaces in excess of the ordinance requirement. So we think it's important that that parking be reviewed and our ordinance changed so that that is accommodated in the ordinance, so that when something is built, converted, reused, or whatever, that parking is provided on the site. The other issue we'd like to take a look at is unconstructed parking. For years, we've been allowing parking set-asides, advanced property. For instance, they came in, they testified that their intensity would not be 4 per thousand, and in their plan, parking areas were future, and they had to reserve them, and they had to meet all the criteria and access and everything else. However, they weren't built. There are cases, and there will be, as this office intensity increases, we're going to have to be moving into them. But right now, there's no trigger that can force it. And the subsequent owner, there's no bonding, there's no any way to really enforce, automatically trigger that. The zoning officer should be able to say, oh, they're parking out on the highway. You have to build that parking lot now. There has to be a measure, a trigger to cause that. I personally think that setting parking aside like that is very good. The use today may not require that, but there will come a time, because nothing, I mean, if people build it, they testify, oh yeah, we're only going to do this, we're only going to do that. Well, as long as they're in the building, that may be correct, but every business has a lifetime and they move on, and that building is still going to be there and it's still going to have those issues. There are a couple items from the fire department. They are unhappy with driveway access in the rural residential zones. They feel that the standards need to be upgraded because they have trouble getting equipment in and out and around. Years ago, we put in the requirements emergency water supply. What they're finding is a lack of maintenance, and some of the designs have not worked out as well as possible, and I think that some of that needs to be addressed, and I request that you discuss that with them as far as details. The other problem they have is in the hills. When that was built, it was a desert with all these skinny trees on corners. Now those trees are beautiful, and you can hardly see around some of the corners, and as a result, they have a hard time with emergency equipment in a lot of the areas and finding hydrants and things of that nature. And they recommend that that be addressed for health and safety purposes. Conservation plan. The biggest thing, and really the only comment that we have, is the extensive destruction by deer. Whereas 10 to 15 deer per square mile is accessible, supportable, we're running 50 to 60 and even more. Attached to this is a thing written by the New Jersey Conservation Foundation about the destruction of understory. And I can tell you, I've lived in my house for 25 years. There was a house behind us, and then they built another house over here. When I first moved there, I couldn't even see their lights at night. What's happened is that understory has been destroyed, and I can start to see the foundations. Now I see the whole house. Because over that 25 years, that understory that's been destroyed has not been keeping up the rest of the forest. We're going to have a lot of tall trees falling over, and then we'll have empty fields. This deer problem is severe, very, very severe. And, you know, you're putting aside open space, we're preserving parkland, farmland, parkland, everything. But if the deer are destroyed, you're going to have nothing but invasives. And it's going to be a big problem. It's going to be a big problem. Recreation open space, what we found was, and there's a number of areas where this speaks to, a lot of the planning and a lot of the building that we did was after the hills were established and we understood what that impact would be. And recreation and open space, we met with them, and really there was no request for fields, additional fields, there was no request for additional parks, there was no request for any of that type of stuff. They talked about, well, maybe some basketball courts instead of this or that instead of that. What they're finding is that the sports the kids get interested in changes over time. So baseball is falling from favor, lacrosse is rising, soccer's kind of starting to fade off a little bit. So from time to time, but there was no comment that there's a lack of property or lack of space. Two requests were made by the Board of Education's comments were, we'd like to see a skateboard park, and if there were tennis courts, we'd be able to work them into the curriculum. Well, for those of us that are around for a while, we know we built a skate park, and we had so much trouble with it, we took it apart and donated the parts to Berners Township or somebody, and found that that was not the best decision we ever made, but we tried. Circulation plan. This is one of these places where big changes, we're all looking at big changes. At least we were until Uber ran over an old lady in Arizona. But there's a couple of things. Number one, the movement to electric vehicles. When you think about electric vehicles, they say, oh, you're just going to plug them in. Well, if you do a thumbnail and you say, well, a 1 pound of gasoline has about 11,000 BTUs in it, so that means a gallon of gas has about 72,000 BTUs in it. There's 3.4 watts per BTU. By the time you, or 3.4 BTUs per watt, by the time you take a look at what an electric car is going to take, it's a lot of energy. It's a tremendous amount of energy. And you have to take every gas station with 4 10,000 gallon tanks. In order to convert that from gasoline to electricity delivered to somebody's house, the impact on the infrastructure is going to be very, very, very substantial. We complained about the telephone poles we have now up and down the roads and the number of power lines and everything else. You know, it's a big deal. And so the question is, how fast is this going to happen? How fast can we get to it? Can we go to centralized? Can solar take the place for charging? I mean, there's a lot of issues with it. But the common knowledge, or the experts' projection is that 2045 is kind of the time when gasoline will be supplemented. But there's going to be a lot of changes. The other big issue, of course, is self-driving cars. And it sounds very good. Wow, we're not going to have parking, because at home you'll dial up the car, or you're scheduled every morning at 8 o'clock. It'll take you to your office, you get out of it, and it goes away. Goes get the next guy. Well, after everybody gets to work, those cars got to go somewhere. And those cars all have to be charged, so that when the guy's ready to go home, it's ready to go. So where are we going to put all these vehicles? Where are we going to charge them? Will they go back to your house? Will you own it or will you not own it? mean, this is something that we had a lot of fun going through and reading about and trying to figure out. And this is Tim's area of expertise. He's handling the power charging here for the Environmental Commission. But so what may happen is you may find landlords making deals with Uber to have 400 cars come into their parking lot overnight to charge, and then leaving. And you're going to have traffic where people still own and drive the cars coming. So, you know, I don't even know how to tell you to begin to imagine what it's going to be like and how it's going to happen and how fast it's going to happen. But again, you have to think about it, and you want to try to be prepared, because again, hope is not a plan. One of the good things is that the improvement in air quality. We're going to take a very inefficient source, which is burning gasoline, which is about 39% efficient, replace it with electricity, which with transmission losses would probably be 90, 85, 90%. So, plus the electricity that is produced, as time goes by, hopefully more it'll be solar, more it'll be cleaner than it is today. So, you know, that's the positive side. Safety, it appears that Tesla's comment already is that due to his autopilot system, that Tesla cars are 70% safer than the average vehicle because of the accident avoidance items that are built into the vehicle. And we have Tim alive here today because he drives a Tesla and has had no accidents. But so we see that as a possible improvement and a reduction in accident, because as we know, 206, 78, and 287 the largest reasons for rollouts by our fire department. And looking at our internal roadways, Bedminster roadways, we see we've had no growth. Our population is essentially the same as it was 10 years ago, and within 200 or so. And based on the build-out projections and the way we're going, we don't expect to see any substantial growth in our population. Our internal roadways are probably sufficient. We don't see any, except for volume delays, there does not appear to be any issues. The state roads, of course, are all problematic at peak times, 78, 287, and I-78 has the most accidents per year, with 206 coming in here near Lamington Road being quite a problem. Most of our traffic is north-south and east-west, depending on the time of day, south and east in the morning rush, west and north, and all of that traffic is generated outside of town. Every building permit that's issued in Mount Olive puts another car on 206. There's nothing you can do about it. The state doesn't seem to care to do anything about it. I don't know if they're waiting for the automatic electric cars that'll not need traffic lights to help improve the flow, but I think that's something that you have that you're going to have to live with. Pluckerman suffers, as we know, from traffic, elimination of the entrances at 78 in Pluckerman. I think was a terrible blow to the township. It something that was severely condemned, however, at the time, and the money was taken from the project. However, what is done to Pluckerman and that section of 206 is really, really quite a burden. We talked about a Pluckerman bypass for years, kind of came back alive again during the DOT discussions. However, I don't think there's any money available. However, during the DOT discussions, we did come up with a plan for improvements, rather inexpensive improvements, that could be done to 206 through Pluckerman, relative to lane locations and turning times and stop line locations and things of that nature, which have never been implicated, and it would probably do well to get out the traffic study from both our traffic consultant and the applicant's traffic consultant and see if some of those items couldn't be implemented. As we see it, the only possible relief for the 206 issues would be the completion of the planned Route 24 from Morris area into Route 206 up near Chester, which was the original plan. That again, the state seems to have no stomach for that one either. So 206 looks like it's going to stay 206, and you can work like crazy to try to change it. I think you're stuck with it. Community facilities, once again, the underlying issue is that virtually everything we built in town, we built after we knew the Hills was coming and or was here. This building, for instance, was opened in 2004. We fully understood what the build out was, and as a result, this building should go on quite a while. Firehouse is fairly new, was built during my administration. The Bedminster School was opened in 93, is fairly new, had the expansions to it, and again, in our discussions with the Board of Education, there was no discussion at all of additional facilities required. Bedminster Far Hills Rescue Squad is located in their own building. They actually only operate 12 hours a day, and Robert Wood Johnson handles the other 12. While that building is in a spot that could be subject to periodic flooding, we have felt, for those of you that remember, we did an emergency services study about 4 years ago. We recommended that they be merged back into 29 Fire and 29 Rescue, be merged back together and moved into the same building. Department of Public Works, once again, that was constructed after the Hills development was well underway, and the firehouse moved across the property into the new building, and that old firehouse was made available to the Department of Public Works, and again, should be adequate. And the police and court facilities, now that this is going to be the courtroom, that other building should not need major change or expansion. So from a master planning standpoint, community facilities seem to be, and again, when you take a look at the population not growing, that's really the key to and the fact that virtually all of our facilities were built after we knew what the build-out would be. We're in pretty good shape. Water and sewer utility service plan, they did respond, and the little bit of concern about the Ski Hill area up there relative to failed septic systems and some complaints. They are not currently in the sewer service area. Under the Highlands criteria, if there are failing septic systems, the service area could be expanded into those neighborhoods to pick them up. Due to the topology up there, it would be very expensive unless you went with some different type of systems rather than gravity flow, because that would be, because some of the hills there would be very, very expensive. But other than that, there was no substantial request on that. Historic preservation plan. We have one in the master plan. Obviously, I read an article a number of years ago, and we take a look at McDonald's and we go, oh, McDonald's. Well, the original McDonald's are now historically significant structures. So history is always, yesterday is always history, and the preservation plan should be reviewed, and especially with the expansion, the position of the Jacobus Vanderveer House and this environs, we should be looking out and making sure that our inventories are up to date and everything else. And housing plan, you've reached a settlement, 2025, that's beyond the 6-year master plan look. So recycling plan is a county function that's been relegated to the county. Farmland preservation, again, we're talking about increasing the size of the lots to a minimum of 25 acres. Now, Frank and I talked about this years and years and years ago, and trying to sustain agriculture. And I think it's we're getting more and more to the time when that has to be done. We've got to do something to preserve it, because you get another strong period of development like we had in the early 2000s, and that whole plan would be jeopardized. There's already developers sniffing around out there, as you probably know. And again, the comment is made, we have to increase the amount of preserved farmland so that these support services remain economically viable to support it. Years ago, we did a farm store ordinance where we allowed a reuse, adaptive reuse of a farm position and buildings to possibly be a implement and seed and feed store. It has not been acted on. So we probably should take a look at it, see is there a reason why is there something wrong with it? Or is it just they haven't gotten to it yet? Another comment on equine being our largest business, and one of the things you need for equine is you need activities. As you know, last year the Essex returned after 17 years of not being around. The driving is coming back to life up at the USCT, and these events are very, very, very important, because if you can draw the high-quality equine competitors here to Bedminster, they will buy the property, they will build the barns, they're the market. They're the market that's out there, and but they have to have a reason to come here. So how does this play into the master plan? We have a lot of ordinances with crowd control and group ordinance opportunities and requirements for parking and this and that, and you just got to make sure that they're as apropos as possible to maintain the public safety, but also to minimize the burden, because most of these issues are run by volunteer, nonprofit organizations, and they're really helping us. Growing trend is farm to table. We have very little of that type in Bedminster right now. We have one that seems to be growing on Larger Cross Road and Three Meadows Farm, and partnering with restaurants and that type of stuff, especially with the coming of the farmers market. The more we can grow here in Bedminster, the more that's a local farm market, and the better it is for our outlying agricultural industry. And then we talked earlier about the creation of the TDR program, where developers would buy development rights in order to get a little more development in the downtown area to increase so we're saving there and moving here to try to get this more up to date. We when I first went on the planning board, we actually reduced the coverage in FAR substantially, 25%. And I think it may be time to take a hard look at that, using TDR programs, so that if we do have to suffer a little more development, a little more intensive, a little more ground coverage, it's all saved in the other parts of town where it's quite beneficial for the preservation purposes to do that. And once again, on deer, Larry was there and I was there at the Somerset County Planning Board meeting where they're talking about redoing the open space plans and all that kind of stuff. The chairman of the SADC said that roughly 25%, farmers lose approximately 25% of their crops to deer damage here in Somerset County. So trying to maintain and operate a profitable business, I mean, just any of you that are in business, if 25% of your product disappeared and you're in a competitive market, it's really tough. It's really, really a severe thing. So that's basically a quick walkthrough of what we've done and what our thoughts are. There's some very significant things in here: the adaptive reuse, form-based zoning, is going to be an intellectual and emotional hurdle for a lot of people. However, I think us sitting here in these rooms trying to guess what uses are going to be and what's going to happen 5 years, 10 years from now, our zones that we have today have been in place for 30, 40 years. They worked for quite a while, but change in our society, whether it's where you live, how you work, how you transport, what you like to do, what sports there are, it's all changing so fast. How do you keep up with it? You know, I think we have to build models where we know there's going to be enough open space, we know the water's going to be taken care of, we know we're going to maintain the visual views, we have to know that, you know, we're not going to create fire traps. But what they do inside those buildings, I think we have to get less focused on that and allow the market, the people who are looking to do things, have a place to do them, and we're not tying them up in such tight knots that they walk away and they don't develop here. And it's not develop, it's redevelop. So, comments? Tim?
I think you covered a lot. This document is also we're going to send it to Judy, and she can email it to you, because if you look in the back, there's a lot of links that will take you to a lot of the data that we've reviewed to come up with these ideas and options. So there's, you know, other than some of the things that Bob mentioned, there's other options in there as well. But I think the best thing would probably be, we discussed last time, setting up a subcommittee, and maybe having that subcommittee meet with us to go over this in more detail, because, you know, this was pretty much a drop-off opportunity and go through it. I think we actually went through it a little bit more than we thought we were going to.
We're dropping or we're going to run, right?
Well, too late. We spent enough time.
Yeah.
And, you know, we can kind of go over what, you know, why we came up with these different observations. You know, some of them are very, you know, forward-thinking, and of course, you know, we don't have a crystal ball, and so these things may not occur, but they may. So it's worth giving us some thought. Some of these things are happening right now, so you know, they might, you know, require more immediate attention.
I want to thank the committee. They've obviously done a lot of research. I know you spent quite a few months doing it, and really appreciate all your work. Frank and Paul will both get copies, obviously, of the reports, so they can look at it and see they've got a lot of experience, obviously, in our town. So I'll open it up to the board. Board have any questions?
I have
About-
a few questions.
Yes, go right ahead.
Okay, Mayor Holtaway, there's a few concepts that are new to me that you discussed tonight. I was wondering if
As I expected.
I was wondering if you could go into just a little bit more detail. The first was the TDR, Transfer of Development Rights. I really didn't quite understand how that works in terms of if someone were to develop a piece of property and reuse it for something else, there's something somewhere else that has
Well,
to
what
be
happens-
exchanged for it?
Right now, your FAR is 12%, 12.5%. So that means that, and your ground coverage is 35%. So you're trying to encourage preservation in the rural environment. So if you have somebody who has 40 acres, in theory, that could be subdivided into 2, 3 lots, maybe 4 lots, depending on street frontage and everything else. So you don't want that development to happen, right? That's negative development. So something in your downtown corridor where you want development and or redevelopment, and you have a guy that says, okay, I can take this building down and I can do this, but I need 45% coverage instead of 35% coverage. And you can say to him, okay, well, you go out and you buy the development rights off that 40-acre piece. So, and we'll allow you X coverage over here. So what you're doing is you're taking development from owner A, and he's selling his rights to owner B. Okay, so your transfer of development rights, TDR. So you're trying to accomplish 2 goals in one transaction. All right, this guy wants to redevelop. Okay, you want to redevelop, but we have to take the development off this table to put it on your table. Okay? Now, there's a lot of formulas that have to be worked out. What's the minimum, what's the maximum? Do you take your 12%, do you reduce it to 10%, and then say you can go to 15% if you buy X amount? I mean, you know, this is a simultaneous equation, if you remember those.
Even worse.
Oh, you got to balance.
The government's involved, so. But the concept is very interesting and it is though extremely complicated in New Jersey, and there are other tools that are much like it but less complicated, and one that was allowed recently was residential cluster, off-track cluster. I think it was already allowed, but it's been clearly allowed by the municipal land use law, and it's more creative in the sense that it doesn't require some significant economic studies to prove the math. So, and we don't like the word cluster so much here in Bedminster, but I'll just call it the C word or something, and we can just not worry about what's the history of that word. But it's very similar and easier to do off-track cluster for the concept he's talking about than it is to do TDR. Just to help you understand that, TDR now in New Jersey is authorized throughout the state, but there's some special things in the Highlands that maybe the money in the Highlands would be more useful than some of the other tools. But you can use in TDR. You have to do a TDR plan that gets approved by the Office of Smart Growth. That basically doesn't exist anymore. But even when it existed,
But if
it's hard.
if you adopt the Highlands Master Plan, you are allowed to do TDR.
Right. But that
Because that
TDR,
is-
but that TDR has a preference for preserving the preservation area as opposed to what we
But even in the planning
we
area,
would probably want to preserve the planning area.
well, it's a big
So,
planning area, yeah. we
So,
have a planning area.
but it's a great idea, and the tools to get to it are a little broader now with there's agricultural preservation can be what is the result of a C word, okay? So you can actually now by statute take a preservation easement that's bought by the private developer in the receiving area to justify the enhancement that takes place in the receiving area. So you still have a farm, but now a preserved farm in the sending area. So you don't have to own it. You don't have to. It doesn't have to be bought in fee. You can also do some things that with incentive zoning that accomplish the same result as TDR. You need some mathematical formulas, but you don't have to prove them to the dollar of value, which I find suspicious in TDR. The proving of value for the purchase of a development right and the transfer of that right to someone else is one of the proofs required in TDR. And if you can just imagine the appraisals required for that, and to get that approved is really very, very difficult. Okay, what do you think your land is worth as a development right to sell to someone, and what do they think it's worth to use for enhancement of their intensity? So it's never easy, but the concept is wonderful, and it would allow you to perhaps use these two tools to truly preserve in perpetuity farmland without having to spend a single public dollar. So that's what it's all about, and that's what's so great about it. And then the other tools that they're talking about, that's a really great one, form-based code. You might have seen a little bit of that, what we were trying to do in the DOT site. But basically it means you use some architecture to set the form. What do you want this property to look like? And that's in the code. and they have pictures in the code, and there's structural analysis in the code, and there's certain analyses you do, and you put it in the ordinance, and then you don't worry so much about what's the tenant here, and what's the use there, and what's the, is it a resident or is it a office? And you worry about what is it going to look like? What's it going to act like? What's it going to be like? How will this work? Do we like the way that it's? And it sounds like micromanagement, but it is actually kind of like designing the form and letting the economy work within that form. That's how free it could be. I'm not saying you're ready for that, but theoretically, it's free. What do you want to do inside the buildings? Maybe, that you don't have to do that, but that's the philosophy of form-based code. And in New Jersey, it's good to do that in tracts because you want to do it in plan develop. The best way to do it is in plan developments. Hopefully, that's not a negative word to you too, or phrase to you too. But why do you use that phrase? Because that phrase lets you have a variety of intensity within the same zone, but with restrictions on it, so that one part of the zone is low intensity and one part is high intensity, but they're in the same plan development. So, great ideas, but a lot of things to think about and where to.
One other question I have.
Creativity.
So adaptive reuse. In order to do an appropriate adaptive reuse in a site like AT&T, it would be better to have a form-based development plan in place. Does that make sense, the way I said that?
Yeah, the form is a formula. It's your setbacks, it's building heights, it's, as Tom says, possibly even architectural, to the point where you give renderings of what the architectural is, where I'm a little far from me, but I think that maximum building size, for instance, in the OR zone here, you have a maximum building size. So you're saying you can build so many square feet. Now, if 10% of that is residential and 20% is retail and 40% is office, or 20% is residential and 30% is, I mean, you can't decide the mix. You really should let the market decide the mix. Because those people do all the market research, they're up on the trends, and that's the advantage of requiring a larger tract, because then you have the resources to do those types of studies and get the mix right. They want to make money, they want to be sure that the property is used and buildings are occupied, so they're not going to build stuff they don't need.
Okay, I have another question.
Sure.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
Maybe the question for Tim. Did anyone speak to the Watershed Association in terms of what they need or how their concerns are or anything like that?
We had a meeting with the Highlands Council. We did meet with them. We did not specifically meet with the excuse me.
Do you think that either our board or a subcommittee or someone should meet with them? I don't really know exactly what they do, but it seems like...
I think their interaction with the Environmental Commission is much, much more important.
Right.
Yeah, because...
But in the master plan, should we address any of their concerns, or?
Well, we do through stream preservation and stream encroachment issues and open space and contiguous open space. All that are the things that they're looking at. Raritan Headwaters. They're very concerned about preserving the watershed and the ability of the watershed to produce the water that we all drink. So, the conservation plan is a big, big part of that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Great job.
Anyone else? Rich?
To follow up on one of the questions that Lou was asking, so if you take a site like AT&T, and I think where I kind of heard you going, Bob, was to treat that as a cluster, and to lend some kind of formulation to the way it was redeveloped, as opposed to allowing a dozen different developers to go carve it up into a dozen different pieces, and then you have this haphazard kind of development, as opposed to something that's unified, sensible, has some uniformly accepted appeal to us as land use judges, in terms of evaluating a proposal, as opposed to this kind of haphazard thing. So you would take, and you may have, if I understand you correctly, you would have perhaps different formulations to use up at Purnell than you might use at AT&T because of its proximity to the roads and the highways. It might be more attractive to certain types of development than others. And you'd almost have to determine what that mix was before you went into that.
You're gonna, yeah, well, you have to look at the ability of the land to carry square footage. What's the traffic access? What's the water supply? What's the sewage supply? What are the viewscapes? What are the emergency service access? How far away is it from here? How is it from there? And you have to evaluate each one of these tracks independently. And your form-based zoning is going to have to take that into account. So we have an AR1 and an AR2. One being the non-residential, and two being the residential type areas. So, there's a set of rules that they build by, but you're not saying it can only be office research.
But you could take it to another level of detail. So right now, AT&T is what, I don't know, you probably know off the top of your head, but AT&T is commercial development. Office development.
Mostly office.
And you would come in and say, we're going to allow a mixed-use development there. Developer could come in, put some retail in there, could put some multifamily housing, and could put some smaller type of boutique office buildings, kind of things, all in a planned solution. It might be very attractive, especially if you get into some of the architectural detailing and how we would want it to look. Seems to me Bridgewater's going out of its way to become the next Parsippany, with all kinds of development, taking all comers, hotels and this and that. Every time you turn around, there's another crane doing something in Bridgewater. But if we wanted to be that kind of, with the same accessibility roughly as Bridgewater has, if we wanted to be this kind of refuge from overdevelopment, that maybe Bridgewater is going to experience, we would do this in a more methodical way. So my next question to you is, in your analysis or in your research, have you found any towns or communities here in New Jersey or throughout the Northeast that where you've seen a successful case study for repositioning the town from this bucolic rural kind of thing that we've always hung our hat on here to something that's a little bit more progressive while retaining our heritage with the equine and the farmland and the rural nature of the town?
Well, first off, we're not recommending any expansion of any of the zones, except the creation of an agricultural zone. So what is today OR, some of it will remain OR, but those two critical properties are the ones that should go into adaptive reuse. And one of the things about AT&T that you have to remember is nobody sees it. Nobody knows it's there. 3,000 cars a day come in and out of that facility. Does anybody know?
And only one stinking little son.
It's one of those places where...
you have no idea.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing, really. And, when you talk about development and how it looks, do we really care if it can't be seen from, I used to get driven crazy when I was chairman of this board, when people would criticize what's happening in the middle of some piece of property where you can't see anything. Why do we care as long as they're meeting the coverage and the bulk requirements? And AT&T is going to be like that. You want to make sure that they don't bust out of their seams. You want to make sure that the coverage and building heights and all that kind of stuff keep it under control for water use and sewage use and open space and all that kind of stuff, but that their parking requirements are met, but that if they want to put an assisted living facility in one of those buildings, that they can do that. Right now, they can't. all right? If they want to, but again, if it's under a tract type operation, the tract owner could lease that land to that individual, but there's responsibility back to the owner. So that, you know, right now, if somebody builds a building and they go bankrupt, that building can sit there for years and years and years because the owner just doesn't take care of it, doesn't care. Or if you have a tract type ownership, those individual failures don't occur and they get replaced quickly. And, you know, that keeps the vitality and it keeps it going. But in AT&T's case, we don't even know it's there. On the advanced property, it's the flip, right? That's totally visible. Everybody drives by it every day. So, you know, but when you get down to it, do you really care what the use is? You do care how many cars come in and out every day. You do care how high it is. You do care how close to the road it is. You do care how big the buildings are. Well, those are the things you constrain. And if the market says that multifamily residential use for 20% of that property is highly marketable, well, that's what they do. Years from now, maybe it'll be 4-bedroom apartments. And they can do that. And then years from now, some kind of new tech that we don't even know exists, and they want to put it in there. Let them go. But number of cars is controlled, emissions are controlled, water district is controlled. You know, those are,
Flexibility within a framework.
you give them the box and then they fill the boxes they see fit.
Flexibility
I mean, it's,
constraints.
like I say, it's a concept
Makes a lot of
that's
sense.
not used much in New Jersey, right, Tom? Is there much?
There's some, but
There's
it is
some.
limited, right?
Yeah, it's very limited.
Sounds like it makes sense.
When you did the analysis on the track approach, did you look at, there's a whole lot less people that can buy a $500 million property? I don't know what the AT&T property is assessed at or what it will be assessed at in 10 years, but if it was, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars versus if we carve it up, there's a whole lot more people that could develop smaller parcels. Was that part of the analysis? I mean, there's a limited number of people that could do a development like this.
That's a good point. We have plenty of already subdivided properties for all those people to buy. When you take a look at what's happening, the real estate market is consolidating just like every other market. When I was in business, one of my biggest clients was Thomas J. Lipton. All of a sudden, they're selling their buildings off and leasing them back. AT&T sold their building to MetLife, be back. So MetLife, who is a real estate investor and operates that as their business, is going to do a lot better than
And so
a lot of their owners who would come in who are,
the idea would be to market it to a PGIM, a Prudential.
well, the people that are buying those
MetLife
kind of
or-
places. You're not going to, I mean, you don't find large companies buying their own properties anymore. That whole little campus where big giant company comes in, buys 100 acres, and they build their own buildings, and they own them, and they operate them. Economic
Institutional money is consolidating into cities too, though. So you're seeing a lot of the small players
Right.
buying up these suburban tracts that don't have the wherewithal that Life has, and that Life's
Right.
going to buy their building in Hoboken or
Can't buy
Jersey
Center
City, but,
Philadelphia
yeah, but
or Manhattan.
Yeah.
I wanted to follow up on the one question that I did ask you, Bob. As far as an example of somebody who repositioned their town, maybe it took 15 years, maybe it took longer, I don't know. Are there examples that you found in your research which somebody repositioned their town and did it very successfully, where they improved property values, maintained rate of base, and morphed into something quite different?
Hoboken and Jersey City, probably the two biggest examples that we have in New Jersey. When I was a
That's
kid,
not our model.
you didn't dare go into Hoboken.
Yeah.
We used to go through there to 90 miles an hour to get through it.
Right.
I mean, those are towns that have been completely repositioned and completely changed. Probably the biggest example of a single user property that's going through adaptive reuse is the Old Bell Lab facility in Homedale.
Right.
That
We've talked about that here.
that is, and I understand it has been a topic of discussion here,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm looking forward to going on the trip.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a case where a very capable developer has taken over a large tract that was designed. Now, the thing you have to remember about AT&T's facility here was built by a monopoly that essentially had taxation power and built a building expressly for their use that was very, at the time, extremely extravagant. So now you're trying to fit that into a market where everything is 125 square foot per person. That was probably 400 square foot per person when it was built, on average. So now you're dealing with a market that's looking for 125 square foot per person. I mean, it's so radically different.
But it does have one of the best locations in the state of New Jersey versus some other.
Oh yeah, it's a
albatrosses.
dynamite location. That's why MetLife bought it.
Sure.
And part of that extravagance is probably a big part of what's kept it relevant for so long.
Yeah, the fact that the quality was there and
And
it kept the building.
I'm sure as much high technology at the time is in that building that has been able to been improved on and brought into this time period.
Yeah, a lot of the buildings in the area are being torn down and scrapped out.
Except they are using it.
Yeah.
You know, it's, building obsolescence today it happens so fast and so easy.
Oh,
and
it's in every product from
Yeah.
cars to computers. I mean,
Yeah, just throw them away.
Okay, I'm going to open it up to the public now. Is
Well,
anybody-
I think there's some
I'm
questions on
sorry.
this end.
I'm sorry. I didn't see anybody raise their hand. We'll certainly see this side. No, go ahead. My question was answered.
I have one question about adopting the Highlands Master Plan. It seemed like a few years ago that the general consensus was that might not be the best thing for the town. What has changed?
Well, I never agreed with that.
You didn't,
I did not agree with it.
but there was certainly a mindset that did agree with that.
There was a certain mindset that agrees with it. I think part of it was fear. People just didn't understand it. You have to remember that their master plan was not issued until 2008. So a lot of the early discussions when it was first adopted was fear of the unknown. And I think when you take a look at how the regional master plan has impacted the Highlands, I think you're going to find it's mostly beneficiary. The only way you can get a center designation in New Jersey, and our centers have all expired, is through the Highlands. You have to adopt the Highlands master plan in order to get a center, and that's the only way you
And
can
can
get
you-
a center designation in New
Can
Jersey.
you talk more about that, the center
No,
designation?
Bob, they were extended. Our center and all the centers in New Jersey were extended by a fiat of the State Planning Commission when they met in 2015 in July.
For one day?
For one day, for the first time in 2 years and the last time in 3 years, and declared that they exist again, that we thank God that we have a center, even though we thought we had two of them, and we know we have two of them. So technically, all previously expired centers, they declared that centers are expired, which makes no sense because you exist as Buckingham Center and Bedminster Center, but villages, and so they were extended, I think, in order to help out somebody like Hovnanian for their Mount Laurel claims, and so they're declared extended, they exist, so we have the two centers as village centers. I'm not saying don't do the Highlands,
that's the only way you can get it.
Highlands planning area, but
I should correct you, the only way you can get a new center.
that's right, and so, but they also have no money to give to anyone, so it's not, you don't.
So, Bob, can you expand on that a little bit? When you say give a new center, talk about that.
Well, center designation is a area where development is intended, and there are dollars provided by the planning dollars mostly extended by the Highlands Council for the economic development and wastewater treatment, and I mean most of the studies that we pay for now in Bedminster would all be paid for by the Highlands
And so
Council.
where would a new center be?
Well, no, that's just a fact of law. I mean, we wouldn't have a new center. We don't have any new centers. We don't want a new center. We should make sure we keep the ones we got.
There'd be more grants from Highlands Council for work in,
I just have a couple.
because you have, if you opt in,
Right.
because you could get grants for economic studies and things like that.
And there are
I
some
just have a
towns
couple more
that
comments
adopted
or
them.
questions.
Well, George, maybe I can just jump in a little bit. I could probably give you 30 seconds on what the fear side of it was, or the opposition side of it was originally. And I think in part it was concern over lack of control. I think when it was trotted out years ago, the folks that were not inclined to support it were concerned that this local control would be relinquished to Highlands Council, which they were concerned we didn't have much influence nor control over. We've been very fortunate because one of the persons that sits on it is somebody near and dear to our heart that's out for Bedminster's best interest. But the concern was that may not be always the case. I don't know personally over the past 8 years with the previous governor that we had, if there was a lot of emphasis on the tight control through the Highlands. With a new governor, there may be a different feeling on how tight control the Highlands Council might be given guidance to do. So that just may shed some light on the other side.
The reality is that the Highlands Council has no real control. When you get down to it, the control is from the Highlands Act, and that is in the preservation area. That is where the limitations are. In the planning area, there are limitations. 11 acres, for instance, is the minimum subdivisions, is the minimum lot size. And so they do not control your land use. They don't come to you and say, oh, you know, that shouldn't be a VN1, that should be a VN2. I mean, they don't get involved at that level at all. But what you need is a presentation by the Highlands Council people. They will come in, they will spend an evening with you and go through the whole routine and how it impacts you, how it doesn't impact you, what controls there are. And we have written a new master plan revision. We did our update, just like you're doing your update. And really, there's no change in the master plan from an operational standpoint. Virtually all the changes related to the collection of metrics and measurements and trying to improve the level of science-based recommendations through the master plan. But I will want to answer your question in detail. I would request that you have the Highlands Council people come in and I can arrange that for you.
Might be a good idea.
You know, listening to you talk about how, for example, for the advanced site, I just want to make sure I'm clear on what you're proposing. We would develop some restrictions as far as footprints, setbacks, but we would leave the ultimate use up to a developer.
Up to the market. Who's going to march to the market? So yes, you're leaving.
Well, up to the
market.
developer.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying. Okay, I just want to be clear on that. And that's just very interesting for me to hear, especially coming from you. Because like you said, for 30 or 40 years, you know, our zones have been, you know, kind of directed and in place. And that's why I came here. I mean, I love it like this.
Yeah.
So.
Well, the dilemma is, George,
You know,
is that
it's very interesting. And then, I'm sorry, just a couple more things. You talked about how the income for advance may have ticked down a little bit because of the glut of office space in Somerset County. You know, that fluctuates. And I don't think I think government actually we should try to do certain things. But I don't think we can outguess the market always, you know, and you can see that right across the street. So I don't think we should necessarily zone for certain economics or possible economics, just because some landowners, rent roll may, go up and down a little. And I think it's very important also to really think about the use that would go on that property. And not leave it up, that's what zoning is, for me. So I think it would be very important to really be concerned about what's gonna go there, rather than leave it up to a developer.
My comment and answer is
Yes.
that what are the concerns of the public? Your duty is to protect the health and safety of the public. So if 10 cars go on and off a site, do you care whether they're going on and off to live there, to go to a cleaner's, to go to work?
Well, then, we might as well just go to Houston,
Guys, it's not,
where there is no zoning.
it's not as,
it's
it's
not
not as
as
black and white as you're thinking, George. It's allowing mixtures of uses within the adaptive.
I understand
reuse
what it
zone,
is, Tom.
And then cap it, you do things to
You
cap,
cap it, you make
and
sure that
you do the
no
things
severe
to
ratios.
regulate where on the property. It's
I understand.
and it actually is, especially if you use form-based code, it sounds like the Wild Wild West, but it doesn't actually act like it in the real
Are there
world.
towns around here that do that? Is that?
There are zones throughout New Jersey that have used form-based code. I can't think of a good built example for you to turn to.
Some of the urban communities, and I want to
Yeah.
answer the question, but some of the urban communities do that. They'll say, look, you can go to 16 stories in Jersey City redevelopment area XYZ, and you can go there. And in your 16 stories, you can put whatever mix you want into those buildings or into those floors, whether it's a 1-bed, 2-bed studio mix or a retail component in there as well. So form-based zoning is not brand new. It's been around a while, and it's implemented in different phases. It could be form-based zoning could be mixed use, commercial retail. Form-based zoning could be what we used to, I think, what's now called neighborhood, urban neighborhood, right? Where you've got retail, commercial on the first floor with second, third floor beds. It's not new. It's around. You've been in buildings.
Well, it's new for Bedminster.
It's new
Well,
for
it would be
Bedminster,
right, so
but,
it's
but Mr. Holtway's been talking about it for years. So, I know you said that that's a change from Bob's position, but I remember coming on to this board when Bob was here, and Bob was talking about form-based zoning years ago.
I was also reminded of when the DOT property was going to be redeveloped.
Yeah, we were using some design techniques that are, and it's in the ordinance. It's an adopted ordinance, and it has a form-based code element to it.
My point is, the first thing the fellow wanted to put in was a hotel, another major shopping supermarket, and other things. And then the community got all up in arms. We don't need more shopping supermarkets. What kind of people are going to come to this hotel? Are we going to have 18-wheelers pulling in there? So there was
We need an abandoned rural.
a lot of concern
Public work site, that's what we need.
about what goes in there, right? So to leave it just to the developer
Craziness.
could lead to, unhappiness in the part of the members of the community.
But it's in that sense, though, it's just like any other zoning, in that it goes through, theoretically, the steps are master plan amendment, if you even do it, or new master plan, and a recommended ordinance, and an ordinance introduction and referral back, and planning board, and then a township committee hearing on whether to adopt an ordinance. So it all gets totally publicly aired and massaged and changed as it goes through that process, because that's what legislation entails. So it's a very very much the same as any other process.
Mayor?
Oh, go ahead.
Oh,
Go ahead, why don't you jump in quick?
okay, before I ask any questions, I'm just going to make a comment. So, thank you. Because, what we haven't said is the amount of work that you guys, this subcommittee put into it, or this ad hoc committee. Between the mayor, Colin Hickey, Jason Andrus, and Tim Walter. You guys you went around this town seeking out just about everyone you could find to talk to, every municipal office, every municipal commission, every director within the municipality, and our volunteer boards. So for those who are not aware of how much time they've been working on this and how much time they've put into working on this, it's an incredible amount of work. The research, I was hearing from Tim and Colin. Bob was always a little mystery of what he was really working on. But Tim and Colin were always telling us who they were meeting with next and what meetings they had scheduled. And so for just breaking away from your personal lives, your professional lives, I just want to say thank you.
Thank you.
I think, as I said before, thank you, Bob, for all the work that you have done on this and in the months that you've spent on it. It's
Yeah, I
a
think that-
valuable tool to work with.
I think we now have 3 very well-educated committee members on the
do.
concepts of zoning and how the municipality works, right, Tim?
I'm dreaming about it.
Carol, if I...
Go ahead, Mayor.
if I can
We feel
jump in-
sorry for you.
If I can jump in, Larry stole a little of my thunder, but to that point, though, I look at what we have here, and I'm looking at this along with you guys for the first time here. I think we got exactly what we were looking for. And when I say exactly what we were looking for, we got a lot to think about. We got a lot of things that maybe we didn't think about or aren't obvious to us. As was just stated, we've got 3 new people that are getting educated at the foot of somebody that really knows this town better than most anybody I know. So I think we've gained a benefit there. We're not, as a group, required to just nod our head to this. This is really stuff for us to launch from and say, let's dig into this deeper, figure out what we think we want. Let's talk to our neighbors. Let's find out what people are going to come in and give us opinion about. But there's an awful lot of really, just from what I've heard tonight, an amazing amount of food for thought here. And a lot of stuff I've not heard or thought about before, and I hope it's really something that we can sink our teeth into and really make for a much better master plan at the end of this process. Now, I do have one specific question as we go through this. As we talk about mixed use, and mixed use may or may not have a residential component, one of the things that's always nagging out there is, and I know you talked to the school, what was the feedback you got from them? The one you have in here is that they're not anticipating any new growth or new requirements for facilities.
They did not discuss any.
But the other question in the room is, well, if some of this has a 15, 20, 40% residential component, what is the capacity that they have? Is there a constraint with them, or do we know that?
They did not comment or request any.
Okay.
They apparently, I was unable to attend the Board of, were you at the Board of Education meeting?
Colin was.
Colin's the one that attended it for me. And the notes and comments that came back were very minimal from them.
Okay.
I think, Larry, you know at what capacity they are in the middle school, correct? Are they?
Well, we have, I don't know if anyone wants to talk about the capacity
We
of
have
school.
somebody that does know, or at
It
least
all
is
depends
on the
what-
board.
It all depends whether he's going to talk as a representative or someone who's not a representative, but might have the information of a representative. In either situation, there is someone in this audience who does know about the capacity.
So anyway, and we don't necessarily have to have that answer tonight, but my point is that is also something that needs to be brought in the mix. And I know you absolutely reached out to try to get that, and I know that there are folks within the school community that are very, very concerned about it. So hopefully we'll tie those ends together.
We did ask every committee to please respond in writing, because we had a discussion with them. The MO was, we went to the meeting, we described what we were doing, who we were, why we were there, and asked them to look forward and look back and come up with anything that they felt was a concern from a master plan standpoint, which means, what do you think is going to happen in the future? And what do you need to cope with it? That was basically the presentation made and the discussion held. And once again, you know, we're supposed to build out that there was not a lot of requests for, oh yeah, oh my God, we need 10 more football fields. I mean, oh my God, we need another firehouse. I mean, we're past that. You know, the town has matured towards past that point. The other thing is when you take a look at the demographics, and again, in the Highlands area, the average age per household is going up, the number of children per household is going down, the school age population is dropping everywhere in the Highlands, and the number of single-member households is growing. That indicates school growth. Now, is that because of the economic environment? Is it because of the attitudes of that generation? Personally, I think it's a little bit of both. I think that we do have a flight from New Jersey, despite some of the opinions of some folks, or at least a flight from the suburbs. I know in a lot of the towns further to the west that they're closing schools, laying off teachers. I mean, it's quite a big change in what we perceive as suburbia. And are we going to suffer from that? We're like on the edge. We're a town where this is all shrinking and this is all growing, and we're here on the cusp. So we have to be careful as to which way we end up falling. And I think that that really has to go into the thinking. And if you read all our preamble and all that kind of stuff, and get to how we speak about that, you'll realize that, you know, we're on the edge. We're on the edge, and you know, we have to figure out how to maintain Bedminster as it has been maintained. But we also have to keep in mind that in 1957, the geofiscal year, the population of the United States was 180 million. It's 330 million.
With the population of
every,
New Jersey in there.
every place that there was a house, there's got to be another house.
What is it now? Probably not.
All right, compared to 1957. And, you know, where's the population going? And like you say, New Jersey is right now stagnant. Bedminster stagnant.
Probably been stagnant since 1957.
No.
If you discount for
Out-migration? Yeah, but you don't, in terms of population. If the growth occurred, the problem is that the current population growth is very low. Past 10 years, in fact, the projections were not met by the actual, so that's an unusual problem, and that's almost a non-growth.
If you go to the U.S. Census data, and I don't know, for some reason I was actually on the Bedminster Census page just a couple of weeks ago. It's interesting. You see that over 10 years, the average age of the residents, okay, in some towns, stays about the same, right? There's out-migration, there's deaths, there's people moving in. Should stay about the same. Bedminster aged. We didn't
suburban New Jersey.
We didn't age 10 years, so there certainly was movement, but it aged more so than a lot of other towns. I mean, you know,
These
once
are
you
all
get to
things
the
that-
consequence,
You really have to understand how that's going to impact 5 years, 10 years. You know, it's a change. I mean,
And the impacts
It's a
on...
yeoman change from the growth that we had, where everything was booming, everything was building, we were building houses, we were building this, we were building that.
And the impacts on property values, the impacts on, whether we have an overbuilt school system or if there's capacity there or not. And certainly on property values, because if it's trending older, some of those houses are not going to be worth as much, right? One question I have, and Steve, I wasn't sure, do you have more questions?
Oh, that's all right.
What about the going away from those special areas to the, just called the general commercial corridor of 202, 206, from Pluckman all the way up to, and whether it's Mallinckrodt or it goes probably up to the, I guess, to the medical building, on 206. There is, there's certainly properties that have not yet been developed or perhaps are currently underdeveloped.
Underdeveloped.
On that corridor.
Very low.
Any expectations that your committee had for 202, 206? Other than the special properties?
No, the village neighborhoods are all doing well. All the occupancy rates are very good, unless the property is just stupid, there are people who build stupid stuff and they use it and nobody else can use it. They tend to be redeveloped. We have older buildings that are down in Pluckman that are been renovated. There's a couple still waiting renovation and upgrading. They seem to get tenants. The area, if it wasn't for the traffic on 206 through Pluckman, that could be a much more desirable area. Values could be higher. But we can't, the traffic is going to be there. That's a burden, an external burden that we have no choice about. But so far as the village sizing and the lot sizing and stuff, the village neighborhood zones, the independent buildings seem to be doing okay.
Okay.
Bob, I have one question for you. In all your research and things that you were looking for, is there anything that comes to your mind specifically that we're missing in Bedminster? I know that's what I do. I give that a lot of thought as to what might be needed here. I mean, we talk about equestrian and the support that goes with that, and of course we want to...
Well, that was one of the biggest drivers for the form-based zoning, because you don't have to anticipate a need. You don't have to zone a place for something.
I understand that. I just thought
Did
maybe...
something jump out?
Yes.
No, nothing really jumped
specific.
out.
Okay.
That I can think of right now. No,
That's a good question, though.
It's a good question, but nothing jumped out.
Well, I come from that side where I have a building and now I've got to fill it with tenants, and I always look for what is needed, what do I want there, not just put a rent sign on it or whatever. What is the best use of that property for that particular area? And that's why I just thought you've done so much work on this. I just thought maybe some things actually jumped out at you.
No, I think that there's enough turnover in a lot of these buildings that our only concern was as technology changes, they're going to invent things that we don't have today. That
Absolutely.
we don't want to zone out.
Our life has changed.
We don't necessarily want to zone them out.
Completely.
And make them go through a Board of Adjustment application, because as you all know, the worst way to zone is through a Board of Adjustment application.
Yes.
Absolutely. You only have to look at the hills. We mentioned that in here. If you fight it and you ignore it and you don't plan for it,
Get the
you
development.
end up in court, the judge makes the decision. Then you have whole neighborhoods with no parks, no sidewalks, no open space, etc. So the thing to do, and I always did as chairman and the boards of adjustment, planning boards, was to try to keep things planned ahead so that you don't end up with these massive Board of Adjustment applications that
I think that's what
tear the
this whole
community
board
up.
is.
They're very, very bad.
I think that's what this whole board is about right now.
Yeah.
Trying to think ahead and see where we're going.
And that's a big part of the form-based zoning, was
Right.
it gives you the flexibility to respond to need.
Okay, I think I want to open it up to the public. Is there anything anybody would like
Sound like
to?
Rich was...
You talked about an aging population. But when we talked about kind of special recreational needs or even development needs. There's that small retirement community on 202, 206 there in Pluckerman Village. It seems to do very well. Is there a need for more of that kind of development in town? Did you talk to the senior community? Are they looking for more kind of options like that? And do we need, something that's come up over the years is a senior center here in town. Is that something that could fill a need here in town?
When we redid the library, when I was on the library board, we completely turned around the concept of that to be a community center. And, the seniors today in Bedminster, the senior citizen club just evaporated. 70s to 50s the new, or 70s the new 50, is that the way it was?
And then some.
Sounds good to me.
Being 70, I find that very, very reassuring. But, we don't see, I didn't see any demand. I haven't seen it, even when I was mayor. The Senior Citizen Club still existed. It operated out of the library. They had their meetings and they did their thing. I don't even think they meet anymore. But I don't think it's because we're not meeting the need. I really don't think there's a strong need for it.
How about on the housing side?
On the housing side, Bedminster offers a wider range of housing than probably any other town in the entire state of New Jersey. We bracket. People don't realize 17% of our housing in this town is low and moderate income housing, and we have houses that are sold for $20 million. I mean, we cover the whole gamut. Anybody can live in Bedminster. Now, specifically, one of the problems that we do have is people who want to downsize. There's nowhere to downsize in Bedminster. And
stay in town.
Stay in town.
Well,
You can't find them.
What's wrong with the hills? We have so many opportunities.
Yeah, but a lot of downsizers don't want to buy.
Oh, they want to rent.
And I'm afraid of common walls.
They don't want the worry, they don't want the maintenance, they don't want to take care of the lawn.
So,
What you're talking about is...
single floor.
They don't want up and
Single
down, they need elevators, there's specific
right.
requirements. And right now, we really don't have a multifamily zone that would permit construction of a building that would meet that need.
Right.
Now, talking to the Advance owners, I met with MetLife, I met with the owners of Advance, and I met with Purnell, and we met with a lot of these owners during this, on the distressed properties. But their feeling was that they should be providing some of that aging in place type residential in their mixed use, where they would have larger apartments, elevators, all single floor type occupancies. There's none of that in Bedminster right now. None, zero.
None, right.
But that would be a good target market for an adaptive rezone to include.
And
Again, it doesn't affect schools.
Right.
And Rich, just another little data point. The senior van that Bedminster operates has had declining ridership. And a couple of years ago, we wanted to meet that need we struck a shared services deal with PPAC Gladstone, so we could take their seniors. Their van was wearing out, and they didn't want to buy a new one, so we started taking their seniors. Well, we're at a point now where we're having trouble having enough riders with two towns combined. So I don't know if that's to Bob's point about getting together, or that aging population is staying more mobile, but that's just a data point. It may not be a trend, but it's what's going on the past couple of years.
Somebody in my condition, I'm still rattling around in a 5-bedroom house, my wife and I, and 5 acres of ground, and barns, and fences, and all. I gotta get out there and fix these damn fences. Drove down on Georgia's side and busted my fence. And
Good thing 70's the new 50.
Where your horses scratch their butt on it. Any horses?
Yeah, they do that. They do that.
So I'm going to try one more time. Anybody from the public have anything? Come on up and give us our name and address, please.
So, a couple things.
Cheryl, can you just put the mic down a little bit more towards your mouth? Thank you.
Having been part of the team that wrote for the master plan that you're currently reviewing, and having been the person who signed 10-acre zoning, I strongly suggest that if you're going to consider 25-acre zoning, you better have a lot of meetings. Because I believe we had one, maybe 2 lawsuits on you.
At least one, and it's a major one.
Yeah, I do.
So that's a biggie.
Yeah.
Because it sounds wonderful, it's what we want to do.
Yeah.
But people own this land and they don't actually like it when we impact their economic value. Transfer of development rights gives me the heebie-jeebies. I don't understand it. It sounds dangerous. It sounds all kinds of crazy. On the other hand, form-based zoning, adaptive reuse, sounds like something we need to think about, right? Because the world changes, trends change, and we need to create flexibility within a framework that we can govern. So to George's point, right, you don't want a bordello on 206. You know, there are things we do not want in this town, but we do need to create flexibility to ensure that we maintain the economic value that we have. So finding that right balance is important. And we are at a crossroads, you're right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Highlands Master Plan, you know, it really comes down to what Mayor Parker says, right? This town has a history of not liking someone else to control their destiny. We just don't like it, period. It doesn't matter whether it's the board head, whether it's land use, we don't like it. We like local control. We think we know our town better than other people. So it might be good, but it's scary. It's scary. We don't understand it enough. Whatever.
I think Bob's suggestion perhaps would be a good one, to have the Highlands come in and give us some presentation. I think that might be something worthwhile, certainly for this board.
Yeah. You know, the thing that I always have an issue with when there are applications before this board, you talked about it in the hills with the fire company. Our ordinances for a multi-family development of any kind do not provide enough parking requirements. You have homeowner parking, you have guest parking, you have road width criteria. They need to be looked at. Come to the hills, come to any hills neighborhood on a holiday. Easter, it's a disaster. It is a recipe for disaster.
People have 2, 3 cars today, easy, plus
you know,
gas parking.
What, you mean a fire engine can't get through the road?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because their car's parked on it.
Right, yeah.
Because there's no other place to put them.
Right.
You know, we don't park on the lawn in the hills. It doesn't
No,
happen.
right.
That is something that you could do fairly quickly to make sure that the next development on 206 doesn't look like the one they brought here.
Well, actually, parking is one of those things that others have controlled for you through the state's RSIS. Now, that was after the Hills was built, but it is a uniform code throughout the state of New Jersey, and you cannot, for residential housing, a municipality cannot require more or less than that uniform code unless an ordinance that is specific to that town is approved by the DCA, which is rarely done. But I would say to you that that code is probably better than what was used for the state, for the court-imposed Hills Development Plan, okay, so.
But Tom, hasn't there been erosion of strict conformance with RSIS? And is it that the state, or is the DCA is granting those variances more often?
They haven't granted variances, but they've approved urban areas and rural areas having special ordinances, like Hoboken has a no parking required ordinance.
Right.
Which is
Right.
exactly what you don't want. So that's exactly why you can't find a parking space in Hoboken.
That's exactly the issue.
But
Hoboken, Jersey
that's
City, where
because that's a
they're-
specific ordinance for them, right? And then Harding has something for their rural street, which is, we already have rural streets here, and we allow dirt roads, but they have a special ordinance for to allow some new ones there. The bottom line is, it's hard to force, there is no way to force the retrofit of some place like the Hills. And the homeowner association should do something.
Understood, but we don't have to let the.
No, but I will assure you that the RSIS is probably more than enough, actually. What Larry's pointing out is it's been some effort to actually reduce the parking requirements of the RSIS as being over parking, but it has not been changed on a statewide level. Okay, and it's pretty generous, and there are street width requirements that are fairly protective, possibly better than the Hills. There are some visitor parking requirements, things like that. So.
And, you know, the thing that scares me about the development transfer is, what I heard Bob say is you're going to transfer development to the areas that are developed already. And we already have traffic issues in those areas. So why do I really want to take extra development in an area that already can't handle what it has? So that's really the ultimate concern. Bob raised an issue also in the Hills, the trees and creating visual problems for the fire company.
And finding fire hydrants is one of their biggest complaints. I'm just telling you what they said.
Whatever, but you know, the reality is, the Hills is 35 years old. We just lost a huge number of trees in every neighborhood throughout the Hills. I think whether it's the Environmental Commission or the Planning Board, the opportunity to create some landscape management recommendations would be an interesting thing. To ensure visibility, ensure you're putting in the right trees in the right areas for the soil, crazy soil we have here. You know, those are things that could be part of the master plan, maybe, I don't know. And last but not least, I'm sorry, I hate it when you say we're built out. Because anything we do that allows more construction means we're not in build out.
Near build out. The build out analysis done by the Highlands Council put us at 12,000. So we're nearing build out.
But anything we do with the master plan allows for more potential. And that's always scary. So it's finding the right balance.
You're right, finding the right balance. I think what we're trying to do here is plan for those areas that we know may be a problem in the future. We're not here to change the master plan. We're just trying to review it and just take care of those concerns that we do have. And that's all.
And that makes sense.
Well, I think we make sense. We're trying to, anyway.
And Cheryl wasn't completely upfront with us as a former mayor, and we
Right.
thank her for her service and that she knows of what she speaks.
Yes.
Brian Haggerty, Bedminster Fairview Drive. I was going to be quiet, but Mr. Jacobs kind of goaded me into this. As you all know, I'm a member of the Board of Education, but as you don't understand, as a matter of law, I do not speak for the Board of Education. It's in the rules, Larry, I have to say it. Otherwise, I go on vacation for a couple months. First of all, thank you, the members of the committee here, and your other two members, and I applaud your efforts. It was just an amazing amount of stuff to learn. Perhaps the Board of Education would have had more to say. If I had known all this stuff already, I would have pushed some more things. We hear about Jersey City and Hoboken referenced. Well, let's not forget with Jersey City and Hoboken, they operate under a tax haven environment that is paid in part by what has been described by Senator Doherty and Senator Peterson as the unfair double taxation on communities like Bedminster, which puts us at an added disadvantage. I do work in Jersey City at a government job at a highly subsidized building that doesn't pay taxes.
There you go.
Well, it's your fault then.
Clearly. We don't want buildings that don't pay taxes here.
But I'm here paying taxes.
Just joking.
I know.
We don't want buildings that don't pay taxes.
I understand that. But I happen to be involved in one, a building that doesn't pay taxes, which, as I recall, at the last time that the chairman of the facility committee looked at the facility report, something in excess of 800 seats was the plan of the school.
Facility, are you talking about a Board of Ed committee?
A Board of Ed
Oh, okay.
person standing in this room. Small class size is a desire of the community. So the classrooms that are undersized classrooms that are not designed for 30 or 35 children, but perhaps 25 or 26, generally have 17 or 18. And before I was on the Board of Ed, I attended a meeting where there was a big argument about 2 or 3 sections in second grade, which was, I guess, 16 versus 24. 3 classes of 16 versus 2 classes of 24. That was the only time I've seen a very crowded meeting in the auditorium of the school was for the DOT site. It was a raucous meeting. Build out, near build out, 80% of build out, 75% of build out. If there's adaptive reuse and housing is allowed, I'm sure there will be some based on the last few applications that came before your board. I can say that it looks like school is perhaps more efficient for the in-district, which is now about 560 children in district in the pre-K through 8th grade. But that presently in excess of $18,000 per head for the send-receive relationship, which we have no control over any of the bodies, the Land Use Town Committee, Board of Education, nobody in Bedminster has control of that. The Somerset Hills Board has chosen to bill Bedminster at the state formula maximum. For the few send-receive relationships that's at the state formula maximum, members and past members of the Somerset Hills Board have stated that Bedminster, the problem with Bedminster paying that is we don't tax people in Bedminster enough. If we tax people enough, like they do in Somerset Hills communities, we'd be able to handle the 18,600, whatever it's going to be negotiated to, payment per student per child per year. I do always want to object to saying that building something is an improvement or a development. I mean, there's building stuff and there's not building stuff. When you don't build stuff, sometimes you are preserving and sometimes you're not. But I know it's among you developers and real estate people, anything you build is an improvement, anything you do is a development. I think that's pejoratively good when it isn't necessarily good. So except I do renew my question of, is that report going to be made available to the public?
Sure. It's now a public document.
Thank you.
I don't have an extra copy though, so. I'm holding on to mine.
And you're allowed
If I did, I'd give it to you.
And you're even allowed to maybe buy one.
No, you can get it from Oprah.
Typically, salaries in the lobby. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, just a quick comment. Tim did all this printing.
Oh, yeah, that's what I said.
That's why he gets the money.
And It didn't look like all your writing, Bob. I don't know.
So Brian, just to come back to your comment, so right now, it sounds as if, I mean, maybe I'm reading too much into what you're saying, is that the Bedminster School itself is at a good size, could be more efficient perhaps with some more kids, but the real issue on school budget is the kids going to high school.
Correct.
So more kids coming into the Bedminster School is fine. We have capacity for more kids in Bedminster School. It's when we send them to Bernards High where we're no longer in control of that tuition.
I think if you come to the next Board of Education meeting where we're doing the adoption of the budget, you might hear one of the members say that exact same thing.
Okay.
Maybe a few,
Would that be you?
or the president, or everybody.
So you need to have kids in 8th grade drop out or place out.
For the last 30 plus years?
Yeah, has not changed.
Yeah.
Anyone else from the public like to speak?
Overcharging us.
No? Okay, I think that's all we have then, if anybody has any other questions.
Well, I have a question for Tom. So Tom, what's our
Next steps.
Yeah, what do we do? Next steps. Now what?
I was just going to say that,
sorry.
Barry. Next week we're going to talk about the master plan again, and Frank.
Yeah, next week we're going to talk about what's called the re-examination report, which is just a statutory mandate of every 10 years, and you're near the end of the 10 years. The master plan re-examination report has certain questions, and you provide the answers with working with Frank, and he's going to be talking with you about what to put in it. That does not amend the master plan, okay? That is not as comprehensive as this kind of document, which is this would be like a background and bases of what to do in the master plan if you do either an amendment or an update of the actual master plan with master plan hearings. You're not there yet because this is the subcommittee or committee's ideas, background and basis studies, and as Cheryl Roden said, if you were to do major changes, you want to do a lot more studies of those major changes even before you do a master plan amendment, like a change in the R10 zone district. Would most be a beginning of that, not the end of that. So what I think, we'll talk to Frank next week, but I think what you're going to be doing is re-examination report has a 2-month, 3-month deadline. It's not as complex in any way as this, okay? You're also going to be reading this. You just look at it tonight, and you're gonna think about it. Maybe you're going to do some other reading, a lot of other reading, and I'm sure we're going to be talking about page by page of these things, because some of these are basically ideas that would require a master plan amendment. And maybe, I don't think you're going to do it, but maybe you're going to even do a whole new master plan. That takes a lot of time and a lot of money. I'm not a big believer in that, but I'm not you're the board. The master plan is the board's document, not the township committee's document. The ordinances are the township committee's legislative actions. The zoning code is, the comprehensive land management code is, all the codes are the legislature, the committee. So perhaps this is going to result in some master plan studies, master plan amendments. We're not sure of that yet. It's going to be your call. What do we do next related to this? As your attorney, I'm going to be telling you, please do the re-examination report as soon as possible, because you have only 2-3 more months to do it. So, and I don't think you should try to do too many things in a re-examination report, because that just is not necessary. Okay? They parallel. And by the way, at any time in the future, you can amend or add a new re-examination report the month after you do one, 2 months after you do one. But you have to do it within 10 years of the last one, and the last one was 2008. So, but this is a tremendous amount of work here. Just each paragraph alone is probably a big food for thought. And they've done an amazing job, and compliments to them, because so many towns need this, and you have it for free from some great talented people, and that's great.
So that's what we will do next week. Frank will be here, and he will get copies of this report. How much he'll get into this, I don't know. That's up to him, obviously, but he will look at it, report, and do his part of what we need to get done, so that we have our review and our re-examination done. So that's it. Thank you again.
Well, the only request I have is please do read the document.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Oh, and we're going to get this electronically so we get the links?
Yeah, I'll tell Judy to send
Yeah,
that out.
Judy has the document. She should distribute it and/or post it on the website.
Yeah,
And,
I suggest
the
that,
links,
yeah, we put this
you know,
on the
there's a lot
website.
of-
I saw that there were a lot of links
If you
in
read
there.
if you read those articles, you'll start to see how our thinking developed and why we said a lot of the things we did.
Look forward to getting into it. I do.
It's-
Carol, one of the things that would be interesting to me, and I don't know how valuable it would be to us as a group in our evaluation, is maybe like the last 5 years in terms of property tax abatement trends.
Frank will get into that.
Frank will get into
Yes,
that?
he will. He has looked at that, and he's got a report as well on that issue.
Fantastic.
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
important.
That's very, yeah, that would be interesting to see, if nothing else.
Yeah, you're not going to like it.
I know it is. I probably know what it says.
You're not going to like it.
But that's part of his, what he's looked at, and part of the things he's spoken to our tax assessor, and got a report made on it as well. Okay?
Okay.
It will be interesting.
I mean, you have a case where the township committee is struggling to maintain a budget with no growth in this year, 0, right? Which I never managed to attain, but they've done that. And yet your residential taxes, your individual taxes may go up because of the appeals from the non-residential sectors due to the drops in those values. So the trick is to plan ways to keep those values up. Nobody wants development, but there's a point where you have to have redevelopment so that you're taking properties that already exist, are already developed, people already drive there, people already whatever, and try to get them reused in a way that increases their value. You got to clear the junk out. You got to make it attractive for somebody to come in and say, wow, if I had that building, I could really do blah. And when they do that, the property becomes more valuable. It also provides probably better paying jobs. It probably brings more people into town. Helps, I mean, rising tide floats all boats, right? I mean, it's just,
It's that exact balance.
You got to meet that balance.
We
You
have
gotta
to have
find a
that
way to
balance
do it.
between our commercial and our residential.
Yeah.
And keep it balanced so that our taxes can,
Just one comment.
and because that makes our properties valuable too, having good taxes.
Just one thing I wanted to respond to on the mayor's comments was that when you take a look at now the R10 zone, there are swaths through there of very large lot owners who believe in large lots. And I don't think that if you're careful, when we did the R10, we just went whoop,
Across the board.
right?
Yes.
But even my lot, my house was 5 acres. We went to 10. Now, it didn't impact me because of the way it was grandfathered, but, you know, it was just across the board.
Right.
I think you have to really take a look at the agricultural soil maps. I think you have to take a look at the other scientific issues that
Make it up.
go into the whole farming issue and overlay them with the large lots, and then find that agricultural area. Because we're at a time now where a lot of the people that are out there are long-term Bedminster residents. Well, a lot of these properties are now starting to go to the next generation. And a lot of the next generation is here. So their goal is maximizing their revenue.
Value.
But now, when you have a lot of those people there, I mean, in a couple of years, we've lost Mrs. Merck and Obie Philly, and now look at those people put their property in preservation. So those lots will remain large. But there's others that haven't, but I don't really think you're going to get the fight we got with the R10. Honestly, don't believe we will.
Well, it's certainly something to look at.
Yeah.
And, you know.
You have the public hearings, get the involvement, see what the reaction is.
And we just had our preliminary budget presentation Monday night, and the next Township Committee meeting, we will have our budget adoption. And if you see the slides that Judy presented from the last budget, it also indicated some of the trends with the ratables. And historically, our ratable trends has been that the commercial corridor has been down, 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 and no matter how well we held on taxes, the residentials went up. Well, this year's trend analysis is the residentials continue to go up in comparison. And the commercial kind of held its own. Didn't really drop, but it didn't really increase. And I will tell you, that is almost entirely due to Mallinckrodt.
Oh, okay.
And without Mallinckrodt, that'd be another big dip. But what's interesting is where we're seeing a dip right now is in the western side of town with those properties that Bob's describing. And again, whether it be with USET, whether the Essex horse trials and the efforts that are being put into trying to make sure those large lots are as valuable as possible and as appealing as possible. And there's some things in this document that talked about some other ancillary zoning things that make those lots appealing is also a part of it. So, yeah.
I'm anxious to.
Yeah.
So,
Look forward to getting into it.
Remember, plan for the worst, hope for the best, and hope is not a plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Paul, question for yours. I'm sorry, the date of the Board of Education meeting is not in my head. The vote of this past meeting was to go to cap, full cap, including allowances. And the tax situation is further complicated by retiring the debt of the second mortgage for the third floor addition. So taxes will be all over the place, but eventually other things will happen. So stay tuned.
All right.
Thank you.
Do I hear a motion to close?
So moved. Seconded.
Hey, Tim?
Transfer development rights.
Yeah, we have all their.
Buying.
Just food for thought. I just need to talk about all of that.